This is the early morning of the 21st. Not that early. 20 after 7. A little late for me. By now, I usually have 5 or 6 videos up. A clip put up by Power Clash. Lawrence O'Donnell mocks Trump as a lost-his-mind president, and the GOP cowers in fear. You'll know why they cower in fear. Listen to what Donald has to say. Plays for just under 18 minutes.
Well, Tom Nichols, a former professor at the U.S. Naval War College, wrote in The Atlantic that the question on the minds of the top military commanders after listening to Donald Trump yesterday must have been, how can I know that an order I received to launch my missiles came from a sane president? They won't know. How many flashes of insanity from a president should we tolerate? That sounds like something that deserves a zero tolerance policy. And we have never seen public flashes of insanity from any president other than Donald Trump, and we now see them every day. A president who has failed to get his funding plan passed by a Congress completely controlled by his party, then spends the day creating public versions of his hallucinations about the Democratic leaders of the House and the Senate. The president gives every indication that you could possibly ask for, that he has lost his mind, and every single elected Republican official in Washington excuses it. Most of them run away from it. They don't even want to talk about it. And the highest ranking elected Republican in Washington says, it's funny. Those were his words. It's funny. The Vice President of the United States is empowered by the Constitution to convene the cabinet to take a vote under the 25th Amendment to temporarily relieve the president of his duties and install the vice president as the acting president when the president is obviously insane or when the president is incapacitated in some way, mental or physical, and obviously cannot do the job. Most Republicans in Washington are running away from the question of, is Donald Trump insane, for posting crazy social media lies about Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries in the middle of a government shutdown or in the middle of any workday for a president, when Donald Trump is supposed to be trying to find a solution to that shutdown and other governing challenges. It sure looked like 25th Amendment Day in the White House today, where Donald Trump was not publicly visible, and the Vice President of the United States took to the microphone on day one of the government shutdown to basically assure the country, I guess, that he's in charge, and very specifically and deliberately to draw attention to Donald Trump's public insanity by actively seeking out an opportunity to talk publicly about Donald Trump's manifestations of outright insanity.
On the sombrero thing, I mean, Hakeem Jeffries said it was racist, and I know that he said that, and I honestly don't even know what that means. Like, is he a Mexican American that is offended by having a sombrero meme? I mean, I saw one of the major TV stations put the meme up and then say, this is AI generated. And he had like the curly animated mustache too. It's like, do you really not realize the American people recognize that he did not actually come to the White House wearing a sombrero and a black curly animation mustache? Like, give the country a little bit of credit. We're all trying to do a very important job for the American people. The President of the United States likes to have a little bit of fun when he's doing it, and I think that's okay.
Of course he thinks it's okay. James David Vance wants to start publicly acting as president as soon as possible, as he did today when Donald Trump was totally invisible, perhaps slumped over in exhaustion too weak from yesterday's exertion of giving a speech, to slather on his homemade orange makeup and to think of something to say to the American people about why he shut down the government. Donald Trump was incapable of doing that today. And so J.D. Vance jumped forward. Why did J.D. Vance and every Republican in Washington, why are they in favor of taking health insurance away from Americans and only from Americans? Donald Trump didn't even have the energy today to lie again about Democrats trying to provide health insurance for undocumented immigrants. That is a lie. And Donald Trump thinks that that lie is brilliantly underlined by him tacking mariachi music and sombreros onto videos of Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, and the vice president thinks it's funny, but he hasn't explained the joke. In all that explaining he was trying to do of whatever it is Donald Trump is doing with those videos, J.D. Vance could not explain the joke. Jokes never have to be explained. J.D. Vance had to explain that one and couldn't, because it's not a joke. There's nothing funny about it. The president has lost his mind. That is the clearest explanation for what Donald Trump is doing in his social media posting. He's lost his mind. James David Vance says, Donald Trump likes to have a little bit of fun while he is working. That is not an explanation for anything, because we know Donald Trump is not working. And we know Donald Trump has no sense of humor. And we know what they all would have said, what they'd all be screaming, if Joe Biden had ever done anything like what Donald Trump has done this week and what Donald Trump does every week and every day. The vice president of the United States is what Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense now calls a beardo. Pete Hegseth thinks you're weird, you're a weirdo if you have a beard. And so he has coined the term beardo. Pete Hegseth thinks it is disqualifying in the American military to have a beard. Pete Hegseth said that in an administration with more beards than we have seen since President Grant's administration, including the vice president's beard, which is hardly the weirdest thing about him. So the Secretary of Defense told the generals and admirals yesterday, don't you dare get as fat as Donald Trump, and don't you ever, ever, ever look like the current vice president of the United States. At the same time, that Secretary of Defense wants to worship at the altars of Confederate generals, including the very bearded Robert E. Lee, who this Secretary of Defense now worships, even though Robert E. Lee committed treason against this country to fight to preserve slavery in this country.
Watch my snoring disappear in one night.
That's not true. That's not why we had the Civil War. We had the Civil War over taxation. The South got tired of being taxed to death and deriving little, if any, benefit, where most of the benefit went back to the North. That's why they had the Civil War. But they're not going to tell you that.
The current Secretary of Defense doesn't seem to know that the general who won the bloodiest war in history against Robert E. Lee,
had a beard.
United States General Ulysses S. Grant, won that war with a beard, and then served as President of the United States for 2 terms with a beard. The Secretary of Defense is, of course, an utter incompetent and a shockingly poor student of history, employable only by someone as incompetent and ignorant as Donald Trump. The first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, was also what Pete Hegseth, who had to promise to stop drinking to get his job, would call a beardo. Those generals and admirals yesterday were subjected to the worst stew of fetid ignorance ever stirred in front of them by a Secretary of Defense and a president, who spent the day yesterday and today delighting in a shutdown of the government that Donald Trump himself chose to do. They're supposed to be governing. J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, they're supposed to be keeping the government open. That's the one task of the executive branch. And they are supposed to do it cooperatively, which is, it may be hard to believe tonight, the American way. Doing things cooperatively with people you don't always agree with and sometimes never agree with. And that's not just an American form of social wisdom. That is how civilization has advanced on this planet, by cooperation. Small scale and large scale and ultimately international and intercontinental cooperation, something Donald Trump and all Republicans now swear to oppose. But we all still do it. We out here all still do it every day. No one has described how we do it better than Jon Stewart, and what has always been for me his finest moment of so many fine moments. It was 15 years ago when many of us thought then that our politics were coming apart, that people were losing the ability to talk to each other across the political divide. Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert went to Washington and of a Saturday afternoon held a rally called the Rally to Restore Sanity. Jon Stewart created that day an image of our cooperation that I found then and now unforgettable. He located that cooperation in the place that so many Americans think of as the roughest place in the country, the rudest place in the country, certainly, a place they certainly never want to have to try to navigate through traffic jams, a place where everything from the outside seems chaotic and impossibly crowded. It is a place that Donald Trump decided to attack today in his own hateful way, because the place where Donald Trump is from voted against him. And so he decided to try to stop funding for the new tunnel under the Hudson River joining New York and New Jersey, a crucial interstate connector that benefits the entire country, not just New York and New Jersey commuters. On that day 15 years ago when Barack Obama was president, and no one feared for the sanity of the President of the United States, but many of us had thought that our politics had come to the most tense standoff since the Vietnam War. Jon Stewart, in a truly beautiful flight of urban poetry, found the soul of American cooperation, the soul of the American way in a tunnel.
Most Americans don't live their lives solely as Democrats, Republicans, liberals, or conservatives. Americans live their lives more as people that are just a little bit late for something they have to do. Often something they do not want to do. But they do impossible things every day that are only made possible through the little reasonable compromises we all make. Look on the screen. This is where we are. This is who we are. These cars. That's a school teacher, probably thinks his taxes are too high. He's going to work. There's another car. A woman with 2 small kids can't really think about anything else right now. There's another car swinging. I don't even know if you can see it. These millions of cars must somehow find a way to squeeze one by one into a mile-long, 30-foot-wide tunnel carved underneath a mighty river. Carved by people, by the way, who I'm sure had their differences. And they do it. Concession by concession. You go, then I'll go. You go, then I'll go. You go, then I'll go. Oh my God, is that an NRA sticker on your car? Is that an Obama sticker on your car? Oh, that's okay. You go, and then I'll go. And sure, at some point, there will be a selfish jerk who zips up the shoulder and cuts in at the last minute. But that individual is rare, and he is scorned and not hired as an analyst. Because we know instinctively as a people that if we are to get through the darkness and back into the light, we have to work together. And the truth is, there will always be darkness. And sometimes the light at the end of the tunnel isn't the promised land. Sometimes it's just New Jersey. But we do it anyway. Together.
I almost passed.
Another ad just pops up. I'll get rid of it.
For 100 years, the Harlem Tunnel connecting New York and New Jersey You go, then I'll go. You go, then I'll go. You go, then I'll go. Pure poetry. And we all do it every day. Getting on subways, getting on escalators, elevators, airplanes, driving on the freeways. We all know how to do it. And Congress used to know how to do it, and Congress used to do it. But Donald Trump doesn't want to do it. And so the government.
What we're watching right now is nothing short of a national crisis wrapped in a comedy of denial. Republicans continue to excuse Donald Trump's erratic, reckless, and downright alarming behavior, brushing it off like it's just Trump being Trump, while the rest of the country is staring at the Constitution wondering, isn't this what the 25th Amendment is for? But instead of confronting the reality that the president's conduct has veered into the absurd GOP lawmakers cling to him like a life raft, even as the ship is clearly taking on water. Lawrence O'Donnell said it perfectly. How much insanity from a president are Americans supposed to tolerate? How many bizarre public meltdowns? How many unhinged policy decisions? How many impulsive acts that harm real people? Because we're not talking about minor quirks. We're talking about a man whose erratic decisions have shut down the U.S. government, blown up bipartisan deals, and plunged basic national functions into chaos simply because compromise bruises his ego. And it's not just Trump. His own cabinet officials, including former secretaries of defense, have said and done things that would have ended political careers in any other administration. Derogatory comments, reckless judgment, juvenile behavior. Instead of serving as guardrails, they became enablers. Instead of guiding the executive branch toward cooperation, the foundation of civilization itself, they adopted Trump's scorched earth mentality. Attack, divide, punish, repeat. Take the Hudson River Tunnel fiasco. Trump tried to block urgently needed funding for a piece of infrastructure that millions of Americans rely on. Not because it was wasteful, not because it was wasteful, not because it was flawed. No, because he wanted revenge on political opponents in New York. Think about that. A president willing to sabotage transportation, commuters, safety, and the national economy just to settle a personal score. Meanwhile, millions of drivers from every background, liberals, conservatives, independents, pass through that tunnel every year without ramming each other off the road. People understand cooperation. People understand shared space. The tunnel works because Americans know how to coexist. Trump is the exception, not the rule. And now, with the government shutdown, he engineered hanging over the country like a storm cloud. We're seeing the consequences of a president who sees compromise as weakness. Federal workers can't get paid. Families lose childcare, food assistance, medical coverage. Businesses suffer. All because one man refuses to acknowledge that governing requires cooperation, not vengeance. Republicans could stop this. They could step in. They could invoke the constitutional tools designed for moments like this, including the 25th Amendment, or even just demand basic responsibility from the President of the United States. But instead, they close ranks, blame Democrats, and pretend this is normal. It's not normal. It's not normal. It's not sustainable. And it's not leadership. Because civilization moves forward only one way, together. It's built on compromise, cooperation, and the understanding that no single person gets everything they want. Donald Trump rejects all of that, and his party lets him. The result, a president spiraling, a government shutting down, a nation paying the price.
You know what's scary, folks? This guy's got his finger on the nuclear trigger, and I think he knows he's going down, and I think if he realizes he's going down, he's going to take us all with him. You think not? You got your head up your ass. The guy is dangerous. He's a psychopath. He's also, I believe, a full-blown pedophile. You know, folks, I watched the entire clip because I want to know what's in it. Pass it along. I can't do this alone.